June 4, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Unteroffizier Herman Butcher clutched the ship's railing as he stepped down the gangplank, his legs still weak after 14 days at sea. Through the morning mist, he saw something that directly contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda. American dock workers, white and black, worked together using machines that looked as if they belonged to another century. Women in coveralls operated massive cranes. Children sold newspapers near the gates. No one ran. No one stared in fear at the enemy uniforms. Die Spinnen, die Amerikaner, he whispered to the man behind him. The Americans are crazy. Butcher would later record this moment in his memoir, Behind Barbed Wire, published in Germany in 1952, one of the most detailed first-hand accounts of prisoner life in the United States. Norfolk Naval Base covered more than 4,300 acres. Its docks stretched farther than the eye could see. Cranes loaded and unloaded dozens of ships at once. In a single morning, this one port handled more cargo than Hamburg did in an entire week. Yet it was not the size that stunned the prisoners, it was the normality. Civilians walked freely near warships, vendors sold coffee and donuts within sight of military installations. A brass band played popular music at a nearby war bond rally. 2,500 veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps stood in formation on American soil, the first major group of what would eventually become 425,000 German prisoners held in the United States by the end of the war. What they would experience in the coming months was more disturbing than American abundance. They encountered something deeply unsettling to the military mind, a nation at war that refused to behave like one, a society so confident in its strength that it treated mortal enemies more like troublesome guests, a people whose strange customs would erode Nazi ideology more effectively than defeat on the battlefield. Processing at Norfolk began with what Butcher later called the first impossibility. German military doctrine, from Poland to France to North Africa, treated prisoners either as tools to be exploited or as burdens to be ignored. The Geneva Convention was followed only when convenient. But here, American officers read the convention aloud in German. They explained rights. They asked about dietary needs. Red Cross records from June 1943 showed Jewish American personnel, including sergeants with clearly Jewish surnames, handing out Red Cross packages and calmly explaining that kosher meals were available for Jewish prisoners. Several German soldiers laughed nervously, assuming it was a cruel joke. It was not. The U.S. Army had planned for the religious needs of its enemies. Medical checks shattered expectations even further. Wounded German prisoners received penicillin, the same miracle drug that was scarce even in German field hospitals. Swiss Red Cross inspector Guy Matroyer wrote in July 1943, medical treatment given to German prisoners equals or exceeds that provided to American troops. Prisoners expressed disbelief at the level of care. African American medical staff worked at Norfolk, though segregation still existed elsewhere in the military. One documented case involved a black medical technician drawing blood from Wehrmacht officers during routine screenings. In Germany, such racial contact was illegal. Here, it was standard procedure. The greatest shock came at mealtime. German prisoners were led into a mess hall where American sailors were already eating. The two groups sat at opposite ends of the same building, used the same food lines, and received the same meals. The Americans barely noticed them, more focused on a baseball game on the radio than on enemies seated 50 feet away. The 3-day train journey to camps inland created even more disbelief. Unlike Germany's secretive prisoner transports, the Americans made no effort to hide the prisoners. They traveled not in boxcars, but in passenger coaches with cushioned seats. Trains stopped at regular stations where civilians gathered openly. At Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, German prisoners watched American families saying goodbye to soldiers heading for training. Wives kissed husbands in public. Children waved flags. Teenagers shared milkshakes in the station cafe. Enemies and families stood on the same platform, separated only by windows and guards who seemed more concerned with crowd control than surveillance. The trains passed industrial centers that should have been concealed. Instead, factories' names displayed in enormous letters. From the rail cars, prisoners could see the Glenn L. Martin aircraft plant in Baltimore, its parking lots filled with workers' personal cars. Rows of B-26 bombers stood plainly visible, waiting for delivery. There was no camouflage, no paranoia. American industry operated openly, even in front of the enemy. Through Pennsylvania, the trains passed coal mines and steel mills running non-stop. The night sky glowed orange from blast furnaces that never shut down. Workers lived in individual houses with gardens, not barracks, stretching for miles. Every window glowed with electric light. Radio antennas rose from nearly every roof. At a stop in Harrisburg, recorded in railroad logs, German officers watched shift workers leaving their jobs, men with lunchboxes, leather shoes, wristwatches, and personal cars. According to Butcher, one worker threw away a half-eaten apple and casually pulled out another. This small act stunned officers who had seen soldiers in Africa fight over scraps of food. Camp Hearn, Texas, opened in December 1942 on 720 acres near the town of Hearn in Robertson County. Records show it housed up to 4,800 German prisoners, many living better than they ever had as civilians. The camp's construction is fully documented in Army Corps of Engineers and War Department files. The infrastructure itself defied expectations: wooden barracks with electric lighting, indoor plumbing, hot water and flush toilets, individual beds with mattresses, sheets, and blankets, not straw pallets. There were recreation halls with ping-pong tables, musical instruments, and libraries. Swiss Inspector Emil Sandstrom wrote in August 1943, conditions at Camp Hearn exceed not only Geneva Convention standards, but the living conditions many of these men experienced in Germany. The camp commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Stiles, whose service record survives in U.S. military archives, welcomed the prisoners in German. He had studied the language at university before the war.
He explained the camp rules, but also something completely new. Prisoners would mostly run their own daily lives inside the camp. They would elect representatives, organize activities, and manage their schedules within military limits. Allowing enemy prisoners to govern themselves seemed either dangerously weak or cleverly deceptive. The camp hospital, inspected every month by the International Red Cross, shocked the prisoners. It had equipment many civilian hospitals in Germany did not: X-ray machines, operating rooms, dental chairs, and full medical supplies, including the new miracle drug, penicillin. In September 1943, a prisoner named Georg Gärtner, who would later become famous as the last German POW to surrender in 1985, developed appendicitis. He received surgery within hours. The operation was performed by Captain William Calhoun, an Army surgeon from Dallas, with German prisoner medical staff assisting. But nothing surprised the prisoners more than the camp canteen. It was a store where prisoners could buy items using special camp money earned through voluntary work. Cigarettes, chocolate, soap, paper, pens, musical instruments, and art supplies were all available. War Department records show these sales were approved to keep morale high and reduce escape attempts. The idea that enemy prisoners could shop freely, make choices, and enjoy comforts beyond basic survival made no sense to military thinking shaped by harsh discipline. By September 1943, labor shortages across Texas led to widespread use of prisoner labor. The Provost Marshal General approved POW work in farming and non-military jobs. Prisoners earned 80 cents per day in canteen credit, the same base pay as American soldiers. Detailed records of these programs still exist in the National Archives. At the King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, German prisoners saw American farming on a scale they had never imagined. The ranch covered 825,000 acres, larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. Records show German POWs worked alongside Mexican-American cowboys and some black ranch workers. This racial mixing, even if limited, directly contradicted Nazi racial beliefs. Prisoners wrote letters describing their amazement at American machines. One combine harvester did the work of dozens of men. Crops were moved by trucks, not horse carts. Small airplanes were even used to watch cattle and find lost animals. According to ranch records, Foreman Richard Clayburgh Jr. treated German prisoners like temporary workers, not enemies. At cotton processing plants across Texas, in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, POW saw production speeds unheard of in Europe. The Hearn cotton oil mill, which used POW labor from 1943 to 1945, processed more cotton in a single day than some German mills handled in a month. Yet workers took regular breaks, ate full meals, and listened to radios while working. High productivity came from good treatment, not fear, something completely opposite to Wehrmacht experience. The prisoners were also shocked by how openly Americans spoke about politics. FBI reports, later declassified, noted that POWs were stunned to hear farmers freely criticize President Roosevelt and government policies. In one documented case near Bryan, Texas, a farmer told a government inspector to go to hell during an argument over crop limits. Nothing happens to him. In Nazi Germany, such behavior would have meant prison or death. Local Texas newspapers recorded frequent contact between civilians and POWs. Papers like the Hearn Democrat, Bryan Daily Eagle, and Temple Daily Telegram published stories about POW work details and community interactions. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported German prisoners going on supervised Christmas shopping trips. They saw American teenage life firsthand. Boys and girls gathered freely at soda fountains, danced to jukebox music, and listened to jazz and swing, music Nazis had labeled dangerous and degenerate. Young people dressed fashionably even during wartime. There was no military control of youth culture. American women shocked the prisoners even more. Women drove trucks, ran businesses, and supervised men in factories. At nearby Bryan Airy Army Field, women pilots from the WASP program flew military aircraft. Records confirm these female pilots operated there between 1943 and 1944 and were clearly visible to POW work crews. Churches across Robertson County invited German prisoners to attend services. Church records from Baptist, Methodist, and Catholic churches confirm POW attendance.
On December 24, 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported German prisoners attending Christmas Eve services sitting beside families whose sons were fighting overseas. No problems were reported. By early 1944, the Provost Marshal General's Special Projects Division had created advanced education programs at Camp Hearn. Declassified records show this was part of a quiet re-education effort, though prisoners knew it only as voluntary learning. The camp library started with 500 donated books and grew to over 5,000 by August 1944. The American Library Association supplied books by authors banned in Nazi Germany, including Thomas Mann, Erich Maria Remarque, and Jewish writers like Leon Feuchtwanger. A German prisoner could read books that would mean execution back home. Sam Houston State Teachers College offered correspondence courses. Records show 340 German POWs enrolled in subjects like English, American history, math, and agriculture between 1944 and 1945. Professors visited monthly to teach and test students. Camp newspapers need clarification. While Der Ruf was published elsewhere, Camp Hearn prisoners produced their own paper called Der Spiegel, the Mirror. Copies preserved today show early issues filled with Nazi ideas, while later editions openly discussed democracy. Declassified documents reveal the camp identified 3 groups of prisoners: anti-Nazis, about 10%, non-political prisoners, 75%, and committed Nazis, 15%. Each group was treated differently, with the goal of slowly breaking Nazi ideology.
Anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through careful screening, were given extra privileges and education. This screening included reading prisoners' letters, listening to conversations, and tracking book choices. Those identified as anti-Nazi became barracks leaders, discussion group moderators, and editors of the camp newspaper. Their influence on non-political prisoners was encouraged and closely monitored. The screening system, created by Army psychologists and German-born advisors, relied on subtle methods. Prisoners' reactions to news of German defeats, the books they selected, their participation in classes, and their social behavior were all recorded. Weekly reports tracked changes in political thinking across the camp. Assistant Executive Officer Major Maxwell McKnight, whose papers are preserved at the Hoover Institution, wrote in a November 1944 report that the results exceeded expectations. About 60% of non-political prisoners showed clear movement toward democratic ideas after 6 months of exposure to American life and targeted education. Work assignments exposed prisoners to American abundance that felt almost insulting when compared to German shortages. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where POWs handled materials starting in September 1943, workers threw away more aluminum scrap in a single day than German aircraft factories could obtain in a week. Plant records show POWs were assigned to scrap collection, giving them direct contact with this level of waste. Food processing plants created the greatest shock. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, documented by Milam County records as employing POWs from Camp Hearn, perfectly edible food was thrown away for minor flaws. Slightly underripe tomatoes, uneven corn, and beans with small marks were destroyed, even as civilians in Germany faced hunger.
A letter from POW Corporal Friedrich Müller, preserved in Red Cross archives, stated, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit because it did not meet canning standards. Fruit that would be treasure in Germany is garbage here." The American supervisor apologized to us for the waste, not realizing he was apologizing for abundance we could not imagine. Christmas 1943 at Camp Hearn is thoroughly documented in newspapers, Red Cross reports, and military records. The entire town of Hearn, with a population of about 2,000, organized to give enemy prisoners a proper Christmas. The Hearn Democrat published a full list of donations on December 23, 1943. Local churches collected 4,800 individual gift packages. Schools made handmade cards and decorations. The American Legion Post 164, veterans who had fought Germans in World War I, donated cigarettes, candy, and sports equipment to current German enemies. The Lions Club provided musical instruments. The Garden Club decorated the camp with holly and evergreen branches. A 30-foot Christmas tree stood in the main compound, decorated with electric lights that burned day and night. Quartermaster records show the camp used more electricity for Christmas decorations than most German villages had available for all uses combined. Local churches performed Christmas concerts in German. The First Methodist Church Choir learned German carols by sound. The choir director, Mrs. Sarah Patterson, whose son was fighting in Italy, led the performance. Guards reported that the sight of American mothers singing to enemy soldiers while their sons fought Germans caused emotional breakdowns among several prisoners. The Christmas meal preserved in quartermaster menus included roast turkey, 1 pound per man, ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, mince pie, apple pie, ice cream, beer for enlisted men, and California wine for officers. Each prisoner received roughly 5,000 calories. At the same time, German civilians survived on about 1,200 calories per day. Work in Texas exposed POWs to American racial realities that contradicted both Nazi propaganda and simple American self-images. At Camp Hearn, black soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment occasionally served as guards. German prisoners, raised on Nazi racial ideas, were forced to take orders by black Americans. Some prisoners requested transfers rather than serve under black guards. All such requests were denied. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles wrote in December 1943, "German prisoner objections to Negro guards are noted and ignored." Yet prisoners also saw the contradictions of segregation. They could eat in restaurants in Hearn that refused service to the black guards guarding them. They could sit in movie theaters where those guards were restricted to separate sections. Enemy prisoners sometimes had more freedom than American citizens who happened to be black. This paradox deeply confused Nazi beliefs. At agricultural work sites documented by the Farm Security Administration, POWs worked beside Mexican-American and black laborers. Mixed-race work crews proved highly efficient when focused on the job rather than race. German POWs picked cotton alongside black workers who often outperformed them, directly challenging ideas of racial superiority. 3 well-documented cases show how German prisoners changed in America. Hermann Butcher arrived at Camp Hearn in June 1943 as a committed Nazi. His memoir describes how repeated observations slowly destroyed his beliefs.
The breaking point came at Christmas 1943, when citizens of Hearn gave gifts to enemy prisoners. He later wrote, "These people whose sons we tried to kill gave us presents. Their kindness was not weakness, it was strength, the confidence of those who knew they had already won, not only the war, but the peace that would follow."
But Butcher later immigrated to the United States in 1953, became an American citizen in 1958, and worked as an engineer for General Motors until he retired. Georg Gartner escaped from Camp Deming, New Mexico in September 1945 and lived under the false name Dennis Wiles for 40 years. Instead of leaving the country, he chose to stay in America illegally. He married an American woman, raised children, and worked as a tennis instructor in California. When he finally turned himself in during a television documentary in 1985, he had lived in the United States longer than he had lived in Germany. His story, told in his autobiography, Hitler's Last Soldier in America, shows the powerful effect American society had on former enemies. Reinhold Pohl escaped from Camp Washington, Illinois in 1945, not because of cruelty, but out of boredom and curiosity about American life. According to his memoir, Enemies Are Human, he lived illegally in Chicago for 7 years, worked in bookstores, and married an American woman before voluntarily surrendering in 1953. An FBI investigation found that he had committed no crimes other than illegal entry. He became a U.S. citizen in 1959, built a successful business, and later helped sponsor other German immigrants. The German POW experience differed across more than 500 camps in the United States, but clear patterns appeared. Camp Alva, Oklahoma, focused on agricultural training. Department of Agriculture records show German POWs managed a 200-acre demonstration farm using modern American methods. They learned machine farming, crop rotation, soil protection, and hybrid seed use. These skills became extremely valuable when prisoners returned to a ruined Germany. The program was so successful that local farmers competed to hire POW work crews, sometimes offering higher pay. Camp Concordia, Kansas, became famous for its art program. German prisoners painted murals that still exist today in the Cloud County Courthouse and other buildings. A camp orchestra, using instruments donated by local residents, performed concerts for civilians. The Concordia Blade newspaper praised the performances, noting the high skill level of enemy musicians. Artwork created by prisoners is now part of permanent museum collections in Kansas. Camp Trinidad, Colorado, faced harsh winters, with temperatures dropping to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Army records show German POWs received Arctic-grade clothing, heated barracks, and increased winter food rations of 4,000 calories per day. Swiss inspector André Pochon wrote in February 1944 that German prisoners at Trinidad received better winter supplies than German troops fighting on the Eastern Front. Perhaps nothing shocked German military minds more than American openness with information. Prisoners were allowed to read American newspapers that openly criticized the war, reported production problems, and discussed strategic mistakes. The Special Projects Division allowed this on purpose, knowing that free press would weaken authoritarian thinking. Radios in recreation halls played programs that criticized military leaders. Comedians like Bob Hope made fun of generals and politicians. Journalists such as Edward R. Murrow questioned government decisions. Congress openly argued about war spending, with disagreements broadcast nationwide. Enemy prisoners could see and hear all of this.
The 1944 presidential election seemed unbelievable to German officers. President Roosevelt faced a serious challenge from Thomas Dewey during wartime. Opposition newspapers criticized the government. Political cartoons mocked the commander-in-chief, yet the war effort continued and even grew stronger. This showed that democracy gained strength through disagreement, not silence, an idea that deeply challenged authoritarian beliefs. International Red Cross inspection reports stored in Geneva consistently rated American camps above Geneva Convention standards. Inspector Guy Mitreau wrote in August 1944 that American camps exceeded treaty requirements in every area. Food rations matched or exceeded those of U.S. soldiers. Medical care equaled military hospitals. Education and recreation were better than in many American training bases. At Camp Hearn, prisoners received between 3,300 and 3,800 calories per day. The Geneva Convention required only 2,000. Living space was 40 square feet per man, compared to the required 27. There was one doctor for every 500 prisoners, twice as many required. Inspector Emil Sandstrom, after inspecting camps in Canada, Britain, and Australia, stated that American camps provided the best overall conditions. He noted the difference was not only material, but philosophical. Americans treated prisoners as temporarily displaced people, not permanent enemies. Working in American factories changed their understanding of industry. At the Lone Star Steel Plant in Dangerfield, Texas, where prisoners from Camp Hearn worked between 1944 and 1945, monthly output exceeded the entire Ruhr Valley's yearly production before Allied bombing. The key was not just machines, but motivation. Company records show workers competed for bonuses, suggested improvements, and took pride in production. Charts displayed output like sports scores. Workers wore company pins, bought war bonds, and painted bomber names on steel shipments. Morale, not fear, drove productivity. At Texas railroad yards, where POWs helped load materials, German logistics officers were stunned by coordination. At the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad Yard in Smithville, trains arrived on exact schedules. Loading equipment ran non-stop. Every movement was planned, measured, and efficient. For men trained in rigid, fear-based systems, this calm, organized efficiency was impossible to ignore.
Telegraph and telephone systems coordinated nationwide transport. No central planning committee, just capitalism organizing itself for war production. As Germany collapsed in spring 1945, American authorities prepared prisoners for return to a destroyed homeland. This preparation, documented in occupation planning records, exceeded simple repatriation. The War Department initiated Project Paperclip for scientists, but also broader programs preparing PSWs to rebuild democratic Germany. Courses in civil administration prepared PSWs for managing destroyed cities. Agricultural training emphasized feeding starving populations. Medical personnel learned public health techniques for epidemic prevention. Engineers studied infrastructure reconstruction. The Special Projects Division identified potential democratic leaders among prisoners, providing additional training in governance and administration. The scope of preparation is documented in post-martial general reports. By May 1945, 31,000 German POWs enrolled in vocational training, 18,000 studying English, 12,000 in agricultural programs, 8,500 in technical courses, 6,200 in business administration. Future Marshall Plan concepts were explained to prisoners before public announcement. State Department officials visited camps, explaining American intentions to rebuild rather than punish Germany.
This incomprehensible generosity from victor to vanquished shattered final remnants of Nazi ideology about racial struggle and survival of the fittest. The numbers document the transformation's scope. Of 425,000 German POWs in America, only 2,222 escape attempts occurred, 0.52%. Only 54 successful escapes for more than 30 days, 0.01%. Sabotage incidents, 7 confirmed cases, 0.001%. Work refusals, 178 documented incidents, 0.04%. Voluntary labor participation, 87% of eligible prisoners. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupation authorities found 74% of returned PSWs held favorable views of American democracy. 61% supported Marshall Plan aid when announced. 55% advocated German-American alliance. 38% expressed desire to immigrate to America. 23% maintained correspondence with American families. Immigration records show 5,000 former POWs legally immigrated to America in the 1950s. Naturalization records indicate 92% became citizens within eligible time frame. Their American success rate, measured by employment, home ownership, and lack of criminal records, exceeded general immigrant populations. The influence of returned POWs on West German Reconstruction is documented in occupation records and German archives. Former POWs occupied significant positions in the new democracy. 48 became Bundestag members. 312 served as mayors or city councilors. 1,847 worked in agricultural modernization. 2,341 taught in reconstituted schools. 4,165 managed businesses using American methods. Hans-Georg von Studnitz, former POW and later German industrialist, told American historians in 1965, "We returned from America with more than memories. We brought knowledge of how democracy functions, how free markets operate, how diverse peoples cooperate. We had seen the future, and we knew it worked." Camp Hearn closed in December 1945, but connections endured. The Hearn Heritage League maintains archives of correspondence from former POWs spanning 40 years. Christmas cards arrived annually until the last known prisoner died in 2001. These letters document sustained transformation rather than temporary influence. In 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day, 50 former Camp Hearn POWs returned to Texas. The Hearn Democrat covered the reunion extensively. Former enemies embraced former guards. Wehrmacht veterans placed flowers at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann, speaking for the group, said, "We came as enemies, believing in racial superiority and national destiny. We left as friends, understanding that democracy's chaos is its strength, that diversity creates rather than weakens unity." Historians have extensively documented the German POW experience in America. Arnold Kramer's Nazi Prisoners of War in America, 1979, provides comprehensive documentation. Judith Gansberg's Stalag USA, 1977, analyzes the re-education program. Antonio Thompson's Men in German Uniform, 2010, examines POW labor programs. Ron Robbins' The Barbed Wire College, 1995, details educational transformation. These academic works, based on archives, interviews, and government records, confirm the transformation's scope and success. The consensus, American treatment of German POWs, represents history's most successful re-education through exposure rather than indoctrination.
The German POWs who reached America between 1943 and 1946 witnessed sights that seemed impossible according to their worldview. Every casual freedom, every small kindness, every puzzling generosity accumulated into ideological transformation. They expected to find a weak, divided nation. Instead, they discovered a society so confident it could afford mercy to enemies. The transformation wasn't accomplished by propaganda, but through reality. German POWs saw democracy functioning through apparent chaos. They observed racial integration progressing despite segregation. They watched women exercising authority while maintaining femininity. They experienced enemies becoming friends through simple humanity. These unusual sights, mundane to Americans but revolutionary to products of totalitarianism, accomplished what military defeat alone couldn't: complete ideological transformation. The POWs didn't just witness American power, they experienced American values. They didn't just observe democracy, they participated in it. America's greatest victory wasn't on battlefields, but in prison camps, where enemies became advocates through the simple act of witnessing American reality. The sights that stunned them were unusual only to eyes trained by tyranny. To American eyes, they were just life, messy, imperfect, but free. The German POWs came expecting to find enemies. Instead, they found mirrors of what they could become. Those unusual sights changed not just individual prisoners, but the trajectory of nations. In their stunned observation lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of Europe. Their transformation proves that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration, not through propaganda, but through reality, not through hatred, but through humanity.